it's one of those things that in another variety, it's any of the various things that we want to let go of actually can't be let go of in a kind of active way, right? They have to be, you have to somehow let them let go of themselves. It's like there's no self there, but you can't get rid of it on your own. You have to stop holding on to it. In which case, then you experience even more of the three spheres for a while. I think that's why it's troublesome, right? You see it, and then you can't let go of it. You want to let go of it, and that actually solidifies it more. So ultimately, it has to be allowed to let go of itself. Is one way of putting it.
On a different note, you mentioned this morning you might talk about dakas and dakinis, and I was wondering if this is that time, and how to relate to them in a.
Yeah, I heard that too.
My question is, what are they, and how do they relate to our modern world?
I have to explain why Heather's laughing so hard. On Friday night at the young adults group, she said, "I have a newbie question. What's a dakini?" Oh. So we had a good laugh about that being a newbie question.
A doc newbie. You gonna do it? What are you looking at me that?
You were going to talk about it.
Well,
I'll give you the out. You did say you'd talk about it later. You didn't say when later was. Somebody's got to stand up for this side over here. But I too would be quite interested in any thoughts you have on that.
What Conklin comes up with. Well, we got him on the hot seat now.
I know. Well, my first cut would be for someone who doesn't already work with dakinis, would be a kind of a female apparition, like a young woman. Not a flesh and blood person, but an apparition. And the second cut would be that in the context of the Vajrayana, especially, then there are many beings that are. I'm speaking really loosely, but that we use in the context of the meditations. We use the apparitions in a certain sense, like we use this morning when we were talking about Jungman Kongtrul making the vow to benefit beings to the same degree that the previous 999 made. In a certain way, that's an intentional apparition. It's like, it's not practical. It might be really functional if you could do it, but it's not of this world. It falls into another kind of realm of consideration. in the same way, dakinis, and we have dakas, which are the male corresponding apparition of dakinis. And they play, in some practices, a major role, like even in a sense, the major role in the practice. But I think also many times people get involved in those practices before they know what they're doing. And so all of the various, the deities and the beings and the actors, you don't get to decide who the actors are. You could, but then the practice would take on the manifestation of the person who was the decider. So you want the decider to be somebody who you already feel is highly realized. Like, who decided that there would be dakinis in this practice, or that there would be other beings in this practice? That's my sense of it. I don't know what other people would think, but I don't like, and I don't find myself interested in engaging in practices that, variations on a practice, yes, but the practice itself, I want to be confident in the practice. That's a big piece of it. And I get my confidence by knowing who it was that designed that practice, that put it together. Without the confidence, it's unlikely that it will bear its fruit. So I think when it comes to dakas and dakinis and various kind of apparitional beings in the visualization spectrum of the practice, confidence is considered to be really of great high importance. So I think those practices need to be engaged in very carefully, and little by little get used to them and build up a familiarity, build up a sense of like, what am I actually doing, or am I just looking for some kind of magical result? I think there are magical results, but they're not magical.
And that's not just being clever.
No.
Well, it is, but it's not just being clever.
It's clever too.
The context that it came up in this practice is in terms of the refuge. So we have the three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then the three roots of the Lama, Yiram, and then the root of activity, or the Dharma protectors, dakas, dakinis. And so then you have to look into that side of, that's actually a Vajrayana perspective into refuge. And what's that? Well, let's just hang on. Yeah, okay. What does protection mean? Well, that's a very good question.
Your surly neighbors.
It's a very good question, what protection means. They're different, but to stick with Michael's point about basically any way that you look at this, all of these are going to show up in a context, in a practice context. And that's the most important thing to connect with. Not that you have, the one. It's not like a bird book where you can look up and you can find, the double-crested whatever it is, and you know exactly where it is, where it lives, and exactly what it does and what it looks like, and that's the whole story. These are like birds that change from raptors to seed eaters. It really depends upon the context. And in the context of refuge, you used the word protection, but the three roots are the root of blessing, which it's easy to understand that the Lama, the interaction with a person who actually can manifest the practice, does you can hang out in that space with somebody like that and you get some kind of sense of it beyond just the teaching and the words. So that's kind of an easy one to understand. Then if we step into the Vajrayana perspective, where we're looking at the connecting to the result side, that the practice of the yidam is a means of connecting to the deeper aspect of being, to connecting to Buddha nature, to connecting to the nature of appearance and phenomena. So then it's easy to understand the root of accomplishment, relatively speaking. Root of activity is a much harder one. But all of these actually they are progressive in understanding. So there is a certain way that you actually have to build up the context of your own internal practice before it starts to make sense, before you can actually kind of plug into it in a real resonant way. And so that's actually where it's necessary to look more kind of to the inside than to look at the bird book to find out what is a this, what is a that. And I think this goes back to the first question of the three spheres. You actually have to start to see into that a little bit. Start to kind of catch yourself in the midst of holding on to it in a clear way, and sort of actually have some sense of being able to, oh, for a second there I wasn't holding on. There was no I to hold on. Something was completely different. And in that, then, I think how appearances arise, then in that space of recognition, then something about the root of activity becomes much clearer then.
So, Lama Michael, you mentioned apparition, right? Can you, when you say apparition, what do you mean? Just an appearance that one is visualizing, an apparition? Is the Chenrezig on top of your head an apparition? Can you clarify the definition?
I think actually the word apparition may be too vague, unless one intends it to be vague. I'm thinking more in terms of when you intentionally imagine something. So I would call that an apparition, but many people would not. So if we can agree on the term, I can intentionally imagine somebody in this room, and if I imagine it clear enough, I can see them at the same time that I know they're not there. So I would call that an apparition. The one that I can see, but I know they're not there. Is that clear enough for definition of an apparition? If it's too clear, it won't work.
When you say you see, are you talking about an image that you're visualizing?
Could be.
Okay. Or another way to say it is, when you say to see, you mean it has causal efficacy.
Has what?
Causal efficacy. That means it has power, it is real.
Describe. What do you mean? What do you mean?
It may not be tangible, it may not be physical, but it can produce a result.
So if it's not tangible and not physical, what's left?
Well, I mean, I can imagine a thought, and that thought can make me laugh, and so therefore the thought has causal efficacy.
That's right.
So is the
So-
apparition something like that when you say?
I'm not sure it's an apparition yet. Is a thought an apparition?
No, an apparition would have something, some visual. It at least to me, it comes across as being
Has to be visual, huh?
yes, or at least that's the way I.
It has to excite your retina?
No. I mean, I mean, I can have. You can have any Disney character.
A what character?
You can imagine a Disney character.
What kind of character?
Disney.
Oh, a Disney character. Oh, I see. Yeah, I can imagine a Disney character. But is that an apparition?
Well, I mean, if the Disney character is on top of my head and I have certain characteristics, okay, that you've told me, would that be an apparition? I'm not trying to be smart. I'm just trying to understand exactly what you meant. That's all.
I think you have to be smart to get this. And I mean it in the way that you meant, that you weren't doing. In other words, if we're talking about actual apparitions, then you really gotta look carefully. So when I think that if I have, let's say I turn my head and I see somebody sitting there, and I turn my head back, and in the moment I turn my head back, I have some doubt that I really saw that, right? I have some doubt. And so I look back again and it's gone. Is that an apparition?
Could be.
What makes it an apparition? Its appearance? The disappearance makes it an apparition.
I'm not saying that with any certainty. That's kind of the connection that just happened at the moment.
What I hear you saying, this is troubling. This is troubling. I think it's an apparition if I look at it, and when I look at it and I see it, it disappears. So that would include, for example, I have a reactive emotion of some kind. And I look at that apparition, I look at that reactive emotion, and when I look at it, it's like almost not there, and then it's not. I call that an apparition. So that is not the definition that you would get out of a dictionary. But in the context of my own practice, that works for me. If I visualize a dakini, let's say, and the dakini dances around like lots of dakinis do, they're sort of prone to this, and dance around, and I forget that I visualized that dakini. And now I'm suddenly just sort of sitting back and kind of enjoying the dance. Then later on, I realize that I manufactured that. So in retrospect, I will call that an apparition. Anything that I was aware of, whether it's a reactive emotion or something solid like this cup, if it literally vanishes on direct investigation with my body, my eyes, my feeling and all, then I call it an apparition.
I see.
So
Okay.
then the dakini could be an apparition. But on the other hand, a dakini does not have to be visible. I mean, in our practice, right? The dakini doesn't have to be visible, does it?
Not physically visible.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So, when you say does not have to be, are you saying can be?
Can be visible
Yes?
in an ordinary way.
Yes?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, you said yes, sure?
I did, yes.
Okay, so this actually leads to the second part of my question, which is
Oh, no.
which is a little bit of a story, but maybe it'll help clarify. See, it's out. It's out. You know, if you Google it, you'll find it. There's a Dakini Khandro, and she comes out of Tibet, and she has this longing to meet the Dalai Lama, and this is a true story. And she tries. You know, she comes to Dharamsala. She makes many attempts, and she doesn't succeed. And then one day she's in a large gathering with the Dalai Lama. You know, thousands of monks, and she stands up in the middle and she starts singing. It's a true story. You know, they first try to shoo her, and then, you know, she keeps singing. And so the Dalai Lama says, okay, you know, let her. Then one thing leads to another, and apparently she sees him again, and this time he's actually entering his home. And it is said that he displayed his Chenrezig form only to her, because he knew that she was a Dakini. And so I don't know all the ingredients. I mean, you know, since we are discussing this, I only knew the name of the lady in terms of her being a Dakini, and so that's why I asked the question whether a Dakini can actually manifest and be, you know, a physical form. You can touch the Dakini.
Yeah. I think you need to take a couple of things into account here, and that you haven't mentioned yet. And one of them is just culturally, the word Dakini is often applied to a flesh and blood person, and not necessarily somebody who has any kind of extraordinary abilities at all. So I mean, we do that sort of thing too. Just in the simple way that we'd probably say, no, that's different. Like somebody comes and you've never met them before, and the mother says, I'd like you to meet my daughter, and the person looks at the daughter and says, oh, she's like a Dakini. But it really means, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an actual Dakini in the sense that we use Dakinis in our practice. It really means it's kind of a playful young girl who looks very lighthearted and nice and kind and so on, and somebody just feels enchanted and says, it's a Dakini. And Dakinis are often characterized as enchanting, not necessarily for good, sometimes for bad. But there's a lot of cultural intertwining there that I think that if you were a Tibetan, you might know the difference, and you might not if you weren't. Exactly in the example I just used, like you refer to somebody as a Dakini, and I've known individuals who would take it as a kind of objective pronouncement that he said this is a Dakini, meaning taking it as a little extension of what was said, meaning that this person actually is an actual kind of magical apparition, you might say, for want of a better. Yeah, really. So I don't know when you say it. I mean, I know that the use of the word Dakini is, generally speaking, a kind of complimentary thing to say. And when I hear it, I generally think that's what it is. It's a complimentary thing to say. Or another woman will call a witch, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's any intention that it's a witch, but rather that it's playful because they happen to have some other relationship, and so the use of the word witch has another meaning. So I don't know how it's being used in the case that you're using.
Okay.
It's funny, those things occur more with females than with males. And just in the context that I know, anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, it's on. When I was deeply engaged in prostrations, and part of the visualization of prostrations is the refuge tree, which is rather complicated and very magnificent and covered up with all the details of our practice now and our practice to be all the way up to Dorji Chang. And this is sort of a question for anybody who wants to answer it, but sometimes I would have a spontaneous, I'm not going to say I had, but there would be a spontaneous burst of the dakinis off the branch of the refuge tree where they sat, and they would flood up all around the refuge tree, burying trays of offerings, flowers and delicious food and lights and everything imaginable that was wonderful to offer to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that sat in the tree. And I didn't feel like I made those dakinis appear in that way, but it felt like they showed up when I really got into the practice. Now, is that sort of the spontaneous appearance of a dakini or something else? Or just Tara in some sort of a very unstable frame of mind? I didn't think it was me in an unstable frame of mind. I took it as part of the practice. What would either of you say? And to me, that was the manifestation. That was the manifestation of a dakini. That was the apparition of a dakini. I never doubted it. But I'm not sure that I was taught that. Was I taught that, Bill? You would know. Was I taught that as part of the visualization of the refuge tree?
That was something to actively visualize?
That was something that happened in the refuge tree?
I don't know whether you were, but I don't remember getting an instruction like that.
Okay, I don't remember getting an instruction either, but I didn't doubt that it was something that was happening. And is that, oh no, that's no more, I have no more questions. But anyhow, that's
Should we call the bailiff? I think it's interesting. I think this morning I made a comment about looking at, like for example, the commitment of somebody who would commit to benefit sentient beings as much as the last 999 Buddhas did. And I'm not actually even sure of that story. But in the context of the Tibetan tradition, that is not a particularly fantastic story. We hear those kinds of things. And and so I think the question for me comes down to, what are you going to do with it? Whether it's real or not is like, what if it is and what if it isn't? What's the difference? What are you going to do with it?
If it inspires.
If you decide it's real, what are you going to do? If you decide it's not real, what are you going to do with it?
Inspiration.
Could be inspiration, but even that, what is inspiration? What does that get you?
More commitment.
The inspiration gives you more commitment.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like confidence.
Yeah, like confidence.
Yeah, so I think that's important. It's important to know with something like that, what do you get? How are you going to use that thing? Rather than, was it really a dakini, or was it not a dakini, or was it this
I
or that?
wasn't even asking if it was or wasn't.
Yeah.
To me, it was. And like you mentioned, one aspect of the dakini was the disappearance. And they definitely showed up with trays of things and then disappeared. And as the
Yeah.
practice went on,
Yeah.
they were gone.
So that's common in the practice, and for people who engage in a lot of practices where there's a lot of bikinis, it's common for them to show up and disappear and do all sorts of things. And I come back to the same thing. What do you think you're looking at, and what comes from it? What are you going to do with it? So I end up in the place of, if I'm sitting in my room and suddenly I notice that someone's sitting next to me, and I look over and it's like this kind of like iridescent see-through person, you know, and if it's significantly real looking, then I would be shocked by it. But I think that ideally, if I was really on the mark, I would look at that and ask the question, what do I see? Bring awareness to it, look at it, and 99 times out of 100, you'd find out that they start a conversation with you. In other words, it's another person. But the one time that it doesn't happen, what are you going to do with it that will actually be of value?
Well, it had the quality of what was seen. I would say there was not me looking, but there was something seen, and there's a difference between looking and seeing. And the visualization of the refuge tree was just as transparent as anything could be. You know, but a lot of beautiful colored lights and everything, but totally transparent. Every protector, Mahakala, I don't care who it was in the tree, whether it was Dorji Chong or some of the old
So how did you
Karmapa
feel
gang.
when you saw that?
What?
How did you feel when you saw that?
Well, I felt like I was busy doing the practice.
That's
And I
it?
felt, you know, committed to that practice, and it seemed
So you
good.
weren't relating to all the colors and all that stuff?
Well, I enjoyed them. Why not? Like you say,
Is that
when
it?
you see Chenrezig, it doesn't make any difference whether he's green or white. You've often said that. If you're visualizing and you can't get a green Chenrezig out of your head, go with it. You know,
Yeah.
so when I see things, when I see them, they are what they appear to be. And then when the practice is done, they're not there.
Well, we're playing in one dimension,
Which is that?
appearance.
Well, isn't visualization
Appearances
like that
are one dimension, not one dimensional, but one dimension.
too?
And,
Not really. They appear three-dimensional.
well, of course, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's not an issue of the dimension, though, like you can measure it with a ruler and decide all that. It's one dimension of reality.
Oh, I see,
It's
yes,
not,
yeah.
it's not the only thing you can be doing.
Oh, yeah.
If it's strictly about the appearance, well, that's one of the dimensions that you got. But you might also, if you cared to notice the lack of the appearance, which you cannot do without looking carefully at it. In other words, you can't get rid of these stairways by gazing at them. It doesn't look like it works very well. So you're stuck with one dimension, which is appearance.
Mhm.
But there's another dimension, which is the appearance, your emotional response or reaction to it, and a number of other things comes about by virtue of the continuous manifestation of things right out of the Dharmakaya, right out of your awakening mind. In order to see that, you have to see the thing, you have to look at and see the thing that you're working with, which could be an intense emotional reaction to something.
The refuge tree?
Could be. I bet you've had an intense emotional reaction to the refuge tree.
Yeah, I have. They've been extremely varied, I'll say,
Hasn't everybody?
ranging from infuriating to delightful.
Yeah. But the delightful thing now, the thing about it being delightful, especially if it's very delightful, is it's an opportunity to look at the appearance. In every appearance, there's at least two dimensions from a Dharma perspective. One is the appearance, and the other is the emptiness of that appearance.
Mhm.
We almost never witness the emptiness of the appearance because we're completely bonded to the appearance itself. So we miss
You mean some sense of attachment?
whatever it is. It really doesn't matter. I would call it an emotional reaction of some kind, but it really doesn't matter. It's that we're not looking at the appearance, and so we never see the emptiness.
Yeah. Well, you were
Of course, you
talking
don't
about
see-
that this morning.
You never see the emptiness anyway, but you never get a chance to have that experience if you don't literally turn your awareness to that. You have to like sort of, in the moment that you turn your awareness to the palpable experience of an emotional reaction, and you turn your awareness to the thing that appears to be part of the cause of that emotional reaction, and you put your awareness on it, and your awareness is barely on it until it is gone and the emotional reaction is gone, everything's gone.
Michael, I never got there when I was doing frustrations, I'll tell you right now.
Well, you
I
don't
never
need
got there.
frustrations. I mean, you can do that on your carpet in the living room or something. I mean,
But
it
I
doesn't really
mean,
matter.
when I was doing that practice, I did not arrive at the state of focusing on the refuge appearance and then watching as it disappeared.
Yeah.
I didn't get to that state. I can see that that is a state from the way you describe it, but it was not, that didn't happen for me.
Well, I cannot remember way back when the period that I think you're talking about, I cannot remember ever having received an instruction about almost any of it except the kind of hardcore facts about it. Like the tree has this many branches, it has a trunk, it has these things in it. It does not have less and it does not have more, ever. That was the instruction that I remember getting.
Mine was not really that rigid. They may have told me that, but when it took off, it was not that rigid. Believe me, it wasn't. The leaves glowed sometimes.
It was a bird, not a plane.
Well, you didn't know whether it was a bird or a plane or a dakini, and that's for sure. Now, I don't know if that's just instability or practice. And I'm not want to question it.
Is that it?
For a very long time, when we're doing these practices that do have appearances in them, part of the one dimension of it is actually relating to the impact that that appearance has on our stream of being. We're just like, it's just the basic fact. If we hold somebody in mind for an extended period of time, our connection with that person increases. It becomes stronger in whatever way that we're holding them. And so in the same way, if we hold the entire lineage in our mind, if we hold all these dimensions, all these appearances related to dimensions of practice in our mind, our connection with that deepens, and we can develop. So some of these practices just have directly, you use the word causal efficacy. Like it has an impact just by, and they're designed to create opportunities for us to discover something just in the character of the appearances that arise, in the character of that. Trungpa Rinpoche used, I think he used the word drama, kind of you step into this world, this kind of dramatic world of appearances in Vajrayana practice. You know, ta-da, here we are with all sentient beings and all the refuges and everything's all going just amazing. So that has a real impact, and that's a piece of it. Another piece of it is what you're talking about, is seeing something. All of these practices have one piece that will there's an official moment where we are faced with the disappearance of these appearances, and so we have an opportunity to see something about how appearances arise and remain and disappear, and the nature of awareness in that. So there are two sides to it, and as Bokun Rinpoche says in Lord of Love, at some point the side of the practice where we're actually sort of actively engaged with the appearances, the nature of the appearance is not lost on us. The nature of appearance is not lost. We're aware of it without kind of looking at it and having everything kind of go poof, because it doesn't have a solidity. It's there, but it has no solidity to it. But these are all kind of stages. And at the beginning, if we just go sort of from a point of view of first turning, second turning, kind of like we're going to pay attention to something that's positive, because that's better than indulging in paying attention to the stream of stuff that's negative. Okay, really good stuff, very necessary. And when we connect with something deeper in terms of the images that ask us to cultivate compassion and those kinds of things, it's very good. And but it progresses like that. We have to deal with those, work with those actively. And then we have more and more opportunity for the mind to settle with this in an open and connected way. And then the work of looking at the nature of appearances starts to takes more center stage. But we need to develop a lot of capacity before that really becomes more than an occasional spice.
Introduction to the Vajrayana, or is that considered a more advanced practice?
I was going to answer one way before you said advanced practice.
You mean if I had just left it as introduction to the Vajrayana?
Yeah. There is a way in which it is. You could say it's an introduction. It's a way to all the Ngondro practices give us an opportunity to step into aspects of the Vajrayana perspective. They all use it. Sometimes people say it's the foundation, and then the quote real Vajrayana happens after that. I don't find that so convincing to make a kind of a this and then that kind of distinction, because there isn't any place in any of these practices where you have the relative and the ultimate as impossible possible things to discover where you can say, oh, that's just a beginner stuff. It all has the potential for being, quote, advanced or profound practice.
Yeah, because you hear of people who do prostrations all of their life and
Yeah.
nothing else.
Yeah,
So they must have gotten something out of it.
and continue to find that a frame of reference for going deeper and deeper into all these different dimensions. So.
So relatedly, I'm wondering about the Pema Karpo's heart practice. Michael, you had us kind of generate, or encouraged us to generate a reactive emotion as fuel, and then to look for it and maybe notice that it isn't there. I think that's what you had us do. And so I'm wondering if in Pema Karpo's heart practice, it is better to imagine the beings in the realms and do that practice from a place of a reactive emotion, or if it's not, if it's better to do that practice from a place of the absence of the reactive emotion.
You can try them both. See. I don't think there's
How
an
would,
objective thing there.
okay. Because I don't know which is better or which has more causal efficacy.
I think that, there's a way in which it really doesn't matter, but it depends a little bit on what the expected outcome might be and why you would want that or not want it. But my sense is that if you can take almost any reactive mind and gaze at it sort of fearlessly, you might say, and just watch it, it doesn't last long usually. It undermines its own current. It can't survive easily. And when it doesn't survive, we may think that the thing that we were looking at is now gone, which is actually not so good. We want to see that it was never there. That was the point this morning. Like, if you could look at it while it's happening, you have the opportunity to see that it was never there. So nothing lasts in that realm. It's like the tide coming and going. So it doesn't last. But if you were to get good at seeing things come and just not be there anymore, that would be a fairly powerful skill to have. If nothing else, just in this world. Because we always get reactive emotions here. This is what it's all about, pretty much. So the ability to work with those things is a kind of, you can say it's a benefit. It's a low-level benefit. But a high-level benefit is that every time that you look at one of your experiences, and the experience is so palpable, so real when you're having it, and then instead of having it and feeding it and reacting to it and avoiding it and grasping it and doing all these things, we suddenly stop and just look at it. And in a few moments, a few instances all over, it's gone. And I think everyone that I've read this about, they'll say, what you witness is the union of emptiness and appearance. In other words, you're right on the edge. But do you recognize that that's what it is? is also a piece of it. It isn't just having the experience, it's also being recognizing the experience. If you have witnessed the union of the appearance and emptiness, then you have stepped right up next to the nature of awakening mind. Not to say that you would recognize that also, or that it would continue, but I think it's one of the ways in which we get close to it, is we develop that as a kind of practice. When I'm having a clear sense of attachment or aversion and it's just kind of running me, to stop and just look, you can very quickly see, like, that was helpful, that worked, or it didn't work. Not so hard.
So is there a way to skillfully use the experience of reactive attachment or relative compassion to just, like on purpose say, I'm going to imagine beings in these realms.
Being what?
Beings in all these realms. I'm going to purposefully imagine beings in these realms in this practice, and then generate a feeling of wanting to, liberate beings in these realms. Is that a skillful use of reactive emotion?
Sure, why not? Why not? I think that's the reason why we used the commitment this morning was to see, like, how far you could go in the direction of what we would consider unreasonable, and still feel like, or be looking for, what's the benefit that I get from being unreasonably committed to something? Like, for example, doing what 999 Buddhas, I'm going to do that? Like, that feels totally unreasonable. And for most people it would be, why would I even waste my time? What's the point in this? But the point is that in a very interesting way, we're challenging ourselves in a way that most people would say, I've never challenged myself that way before. So to really challenge yourself in that way and sit with it for a while can be a very moving experience. And then when you look at it and you see that it's actually not there, the very thing that you thought was driving the whole thing, it's too late to witness the empty aspect, but you can be totally confident that you did witness it. So it's not like it's a magic formula, it's another entrance into that, another way to kind of plumb the depth of that thing. It's definitely, when we look at our experience at any time, and the bigger the experience, the better, and we witness it dissolving, we are basically going on the vertical axis of going deeper.
So I sometimes will do what Judith is talking about, have a reactive emotion, turn awareness to that emotion, watch the dissolving of the emotion. But my fear is that then sometimes I almost feel as if you can fall into just numbness, which feels like a different kind of delusion.
Yeah, sure.
How do I get out of it? How do I get out of that place?
I think if you fall into numbness, then you got to try and look and see the numbness. Because the numbness is an experience. And the problem with something like numbness, not everything suffers from this particular problem, but I think many do. If what you're looking at is accessible conceptually, that's probably the lens through which you're looking. Not necessarily, you know. If you're kind of skilled at it, you might be able to know the difference and look at one thing rather than the other. But it's easier if what you're looking at is just utterly inaccessible to the conceptual mind. Should we call it doctor? I mean, it's not good to be too numb. I think anything that arises is worth looking at. This is the whole basis of insight, you know, is that you can look at, not necessarily with your eyes, but you can close your eyes and look at what you're feeling. Certainly emotionally, you can look at what you're feeling. So most of us look at what we're feeling and the reaction runs stronger. It's like almost anything we do. If we try to stop it, it goes stronger. So there is a way in which you could say, I don't care how strong it goes. My intention is not to control it. My intention is to see it clearly.
See and look. Can you tell the difference between seeing and looking?
Seeing generally speaking, so I don't want to say this as a general rule, but seeing generally is considered passive and looking is active. So if you're looking for, you know, you're looking for, even if you don't know what you're looking for, you're looking, it's an active kind of thing. I don't know that undermines this at all. If you're,
Which is occurring, seeing or looking?
yeah, I don't know that it matters. But when you're, I mean, people will all do what we can do with it. So it's better, God, I don't even know if that's true. I don't know that it's better to look or to see. I think that if you're looking for something, you almost for sure have some sense of what it's going to look like. You know? Otherwise, you're just seeing things. So if you're looking for something, I think it's not as powerful as just seeing. But not everybody can just passively gaze at the landscape of our reactive emotion. But if you can, and then you have the experience of, it felt like it was there, and then it wasn't. That's a fairly important discovery. Then you're really coming together with both the appearance and the emptiness. I think Kay has just appeared. I'm trying to see through you, but I can't.
I think there are different layers or kind of different levels that one could approach this question of sort of looking at something and then it ceases and then there's kind of a, goes from me to...
We're looking for the microphone over here. Somebody's
and that...
there it is.
If we, at different points, if we're really wrapped up in the midst of a very problematic pattern and emotion, allowing things to come to a more neutral background is a skillful activity, because otherwise we'll be lost in a place where we can't do any looking or seeing or anything. Then none of that is even relevant. But there's a point of a shift, and I think it's actually a point if we're really going to start to looking into deeply, we have to let go of the notion of looking at them in order for it to be an antidote to get rid of this other thing. Because the yardstick there is something went away. And if we want to actually look deeper, we have to have no agenda about it going away. It's that actually completely, as you were saying, we know what we're looking for. And so we're looking for the absence of that thing. And so we can't actually see into what's actually arising. Use it as an opportunity for insight, and anything can be. Along the way, I think it's very important to develop all the dimensions of relative bodhicitta. So the background is when something does attenuate, we're not left with this kind of the sort of dead feeling. That always in the background there is the piece of the kind of an active sense of connection with others, an active sense of engagement and open-heartedness and loving kindness, sympathetic joy, compassion. And the more that's just sort of kind of random, all-pervasive, then we have you have the four immeasurables with equanimity built into that. So I think it becomes very important to have that as a kind of a background, a kind of a continuous piece of our practice. And then when we find ourselves lost in highs or lows, and we look at it, we have both the opportunity for insight, but also when that, as everything does eventually anyway, sort of attenuate, fall apart, then the background element in our being is is the relative bodhicitta side that's there. And that, of course, can be kind of the object of insight practice too. But then there's no sense of getting rid of it. Life is not improved by getting rid of bodhicitta.
Temporary, maybe.
Well, since I came because I have a question about deity practice.
There you go.
Oh, sorry. I have a question about deity practice, Chenrezig or any other yidam that we might be working with. And I actually have two questions. One is I've been trying to work without the text.
Without the text.
And just, knowing it well enough so that I'm not distracted by the words, but just remember the images and the sense of what the text is telling me. And carrying the practice throughout the day, carrying the image of myself as the deity. And of course, it doesn't, obviously, it comes and goes, but it's like the foundation of my life, basically. And it's all, you told us on one year retreat once, try to do refuge without the text. Just take refuge, take it, constantly. My problem in the practice, the carrying the practice is probably the only thing that's saving me right now. But my problem is with the dissolution.
The dissolution.
The dissolution. And Lama Eric told me, he said, you can do the dissolution in a moment. And then there's the reemergence of the deity.
The what?
The reemergence. But I'm not, I don't feel really connected to the dissolution process, to the, I guess you'd call it completion practice. I feel like I'm missing something in it. I'm not.
Yeah, could be. We're all missing something.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel like you said you feel like you're missing something. I can't remember what it is.
I mean,
You said what it was.
what it is I'm just doing it.
Yeah.
And it's not real to me.
Yeah.
Like it is in the creation stage. You
Yeah.
know, that feels very real.
Mm-hmm.
The dissolution practice, I just do it because it's part of the practice. Anyway, so I was wondering if you could give some advice on that, or just keep doing it.
On the dissolution in particular?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Sure. Everybody wants to feel passionate about everything they do. And if you're doing something that, from a worldly perspective, for example, I mean, you're doing Dharma practice, you could say the yardstick for that says that isn't worth much. So therefore we want it to be better than what it is. But I think there's also, I think we all suffer from this to some degree. Which is this morning I was sitting at home and I was trying to think like, what could bring tears to your eyes? It was that kind of thing. Like what could make us really feel like it was something really different? And I was saying this morning that I had read this thing about the Conklin having been predicted to be the Buddha, the 1000th Buddha, and that there was an obligation that the 1000th Buddha would promise to bring as much benefit to all sentient beings as the 4th Buddha brought in 999 years. So that was the obligation being accepted, like, I will bring that much benefit to it. And then the author who was writing about this was sort of taken back by seeing it and doing something. And he said, imagine making a commitment at that level. And so then there was a little play back and forth of, well, how would you do that? Well, you would just make that commitment and see if you could possibly like fit that into your body, like hold that thing somehow. Like, what if I was committed? What if I'd made the commitment, even though it's totally unrealistic, it's totally unreasonable by every standard? Still, even given that, I'm making the commitment to benefit beings as much more than the previous Buddha for 999 years. And the exercise from my perspective was, can you fit that aspiration, that commitment into your own mind, into your own body, so to speak? And then once it's there, just to make sure, extend it a little more. And so, of course, I'm sitting at the dining room table and I'm thinking like, okay, let's do it. And it actually, I don't know that it would be for everybody, but for me it was a highly moving experience. Because the next thing that the author was saying was, this is fundamentally what bodhicitta is. And so we often like kind of dummy it down a bit so that it fits. But the real thing is this commitment to all sentient beings. It just says, yeah, sure, because we're not counting them. But 999 years, we actually have some kind of sense about what that is and how much the fourth Buddha, which is the last Buddha, how much that Buddha did. And we're going to repeat that somehow and more. Then I started getting a sense of, oh, I see. The idea here is that you carry that commitment around with you all the time. It's your measure every day. And if you really hold something like that, you can't treat it blasé. It's like then you don't want to treat it blasé. The truth is that we want to be moved. We want to be really deeply moved. We'd like to be moved to tears maybe every day, at least for a while, and have the sense of that commitment. And so I was getting the sense that actually the commitment, the story of the first Buddha, the story of Conklin Rinpoche, and he's supposed to become the 1,000th Buddha, and all this, that those stories were very interesting. And then it seemed like that's what I want. I want to kind of be in that thing somehow, because I don't know why. I don't want to have an ordinary life.
Yeah. So I did have this. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I want anyone to hear me.
Oh, yeah, you see, you want it.
So I did have this experience, and I don't know if this is dumbing it down, but I am part of the Gurdjieff community, and we're a very close-knit community. One of our members died, but we were having an intensive, where we were together very intensively for a few days, and it was very good. And I did feel, I was practicing carrying the image of myself, coming and going. But then at the end of one of the days, I crossed a couple of people, I went by a couple of people talking about an issue that was very important to me. And I stopped, and it wasn't like I was mad, but I did see and even at the time I saw this dissolution of all the loving kindness I felt for them, and saying something, and I heard my tone of voice, but I thought it was important that we have a discussion and not just try to be the deity, that I let that part dissolve in a way. But then what was so interesting about it was the next day when I saw these people, because I said what I had to say, and I said, that's all I'm going to say, and I walked away. And the next morning, we were even closer to the people that, does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Why wouldn't it?
Oh, it's just that, it's an experience of, being with with companions in your spiritual path that allow that to happen. And because sometimes I've often felt afraid, I'm sure we all have, afraid to say something.
Will you say that again? I didn't quite catch it.
Sometimes you feel, oh, myself.
Yeah, you have to swallow it.
Michael? Like this? Okay. I think, I'm just saying that carrying the image of myself as the deity, it felt, in this case, that at the time I was able to say something that I knew these other people would not like, but that I felt it was important to stay for our relationship. And then I left. I didn't try to be right. I just gave my viewpoint from, and the viewpoint was also for the well-wishing of the community, and I'm getting a lot. And then I left, and the next day when we came together again, it was like we were even closer, because we heard something happened, and I felt like that was kind of like the dissolution, and then,
Yeah.
so it was, it's a very practical thing. I don't, for me it was like a clear thing that maybe my practice is working, maybe, I don't know. I know it's working, but.
Gosh.
Gosh, what?
Okay, his practice is working. Do we want to admit that? You're the only judge of whether or not it's working, of course. But there's something. You drove all the way down here, so up. It depends on which side of the world you were on. I don't know where you were. Anyway, I think that it really is. You drove all the way here, and so there's something that you're working with somehow, and I think you got a few extra things. So we could talk about it more, but.
What do you mean about a few extra things?
Well, a few extra things, like, for example, when you actually, what I heard you say is that you were having earlier a reactive emotional thing. And that was a big piece of our conversation here this morning. What do you do with that? And I took the position that actually, if you don't have a reactive emotion, you can't do very much. That actually, that's fuel. So when you have fuel, you can pour it on yourself and light a match, or you can put it in your car and go somewhere. So this is really a matter of, you're the car, and it's in there. So now what are you going to do? What you want to do is, you want to do something that is useful. You'd like to do something that once you've done it, you can recognize the usefulness. So then you're inspired to do more of that thing. And in the case of, at least in the case of a moderately reactive emotion, like too mild, it doesn't work. Too much, we burn up. And so maybe you're kind of right at the happy middle in that thing. You see the reactive emotion, and you've done insight practice, so you know what you do. You look at that experience, the emotional experience. You just look at it. Not like I need to fix it, I need to do anything with it. I just look at it. It's almost like you have an aquarium with the top on it, and there's a poisonous snake in the aquarium. You're fascinated, so you go over and you look at it all the time and see, what is it doing? If I put my hand in there, it could kill me. But it's fascinating, so you're there looking at it. It's the same kind of thing, I think. In this case, that reactive emotion will not hurt you. You can go and just look at it and see it. And if you look at it and you think that you're seeing it, and then you discover that actually you didn't see it, and you're not actually sure that it was ever there, that's an important point. And if you can do that with one thing, then you can do it with another thing. And then there's a lot of things that we can talk about in terms of what to do beyond that. Now get out of here. Are you in town for a while?
For a while?
For a while.
What do you mean for a while?
I think that's English, isn't it?
I don't like to
Oh, I see, yeah. I just wondered if you were just leaving, or you're actually here for a while. A while.
I'm here until you stop talking.
How will you know when I stopped?
It'll go away. So, just one more question about the practicing the dissolution practice.
Dissolution of Chenrezig?
Well,
Or what?
Any
any deity.
Uh,
Because right now I'm doing another, I have another practice, so. But it's the same, really. It's the same thing. I think. It feels like the same thing. Is it important to do it every day and, or can you carry the deity through the night and then,
Well, that's a question, isn't it?
yeah.
Can you?
I've been doing that, when I sit down in the morning and I do the practice, that's also, I do the dissolution and then begin again.
So here's what I think about that. You're asking the wrong person. I think when you start asking those questions, that's a good thing to do, but it should go to the person that you're working with on that practice, I think. I mean, because you and I don't talk all the time, and I don't even know what it is that you're practicing, but there must be somebody who knows. And I think even people who are kind of independently qualified to be answering the questions, they often collaborate to talk about the details of things, because you never know everything. And there's always things that one can learn. There's our bell. Did you win the fight?
I've decided that I have to ask myself, I have to ask myself in situations, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right?
Oh my God. You suffering soul. That's really.
It was a very wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Because I actually didn't feel so connected to my emotional reaction.
Oh yeah.
That for your fuel tank. Don't toss it out too soon.
Yeah, let's take a break.
A break? Well, are we taking a break or are we leaving?
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Come on, give it another chillin'.
Tara, we have another hour.